Back again for episode 23. I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to continue this. Series has become less and less popular. The episode in the First Coast has 5 views. But this episode is on the Georgia and Florida Railway Incorporated. This is a Class 3 owned by Omnitracks based out of Albany, Georgia, hauling 21,000 cars per year of corn, scrap, chemicals, ethanol, cement, paper, cottonseed, clay, wood pulp, peanuts, fertilizer, beer, aggregates, and more on 297 miles of track radiating out of Albany. They interchange with CSX in Thomasville, Georgia, and NS and Adel in Albany, Georgia. The Gulf and Ohio acquired 2 Norfolk Southern lines that ran from Albany to Sparks, Georgia, and Valdosta to Nashville, Georgia, only 130 miles. This started operations on April 14, 1995 as a subsidiary Georgia and Florida Railroad and used trackage rates over NS between the 2 lines from Sparks, Georgia to Valdosta, Georgia, and hauled 10,000 cars a year. In 2005, the Georgia DOT purchased the Sparks, Georgia to Valdosta, Georgia. Purchased the Valdosta to Nashville line. Missed the line. And the GFR continued to operate it for a time. Now Carter Perot RailNet operates it. Gulf and Ohio acquired the Live Oak Perry in South Georgia on December 15, 1995, adding 80 miles to the GFRR. Gulf and Ohio sold the railroad to RailNet on January 21, 1999, and the GFRR became Georgia and Florida RailNet. This, again, changed in 2005 when it was acquired by Omnitracks and became the Georgia and Florida Railway. In tracing the railroad, I will do Albany to Sylvester, next Albany to Thomasville, Albany to Sparks, Adel to Foley, and then the last line they operated will be next week with the Carter Perot RailNet, who currently operate north out of Valdosta. Starting in Albany, the G&F interchanges with E&S on a very minimal interchange yard that is shared with the Hilton and Albany west of the Flint River. From NS, the G&F has a line from the north of the yard to East Town and another line from the south of the yard to reach North End and Mulberry Heights. They also have an industrial track on the west side of the river that serves an aggregates business with its own center cab switch. In Albany, the G&F has a short industrial branch to Turner City. In Albany, it is the Albany Diamond Railroad Crossing, which is labeled as a tourist attraction, but it is the short industrial branch of the aggregates company crossing the northern G&F line from the NS interchange to East Town and is not accessible. South of the NS H&A G&F interchange is the historic train station and Thornateska Heritage Center, which appears to have had a railroad museum at one point, but there is nothing outside and the tracks are overgrown. The branch to Turner City runs from East Town and serves Terra Foods, Capital Materials, and Interstate Warehouse Services in one area, and Miller Coors Albany Brewery in another location. The brewery has 2 tracks for unloading grain trains and a few other tracks for other inbound commodities and shipping beer. The line to East Town joins back up with the one that runs through Mulberry Heights under US 19 east of Albany. The G&F yard is along East Broad Avenue in Albany's Mulberry Heights neighborhood with 11 yard tracks and maintenance away track and a team track with end and side ramp and a small engine facility. The line to Sylvester diverges in the main under US 19 and then passes the Albany Logistics Base of the USMC. Tracks in this complex are owned by the U.S. government. There are 4 tracks for loading military equipment and a scale track, along with a couple other spurs served by its own 10-track yard, and there is an engine house in a more public part of the military complex. North of the base is the Cooper Tire Warehouse, which might be rail-served, and then a completely demolished factory that once was served in 2 locations. Beyond this, the line is abandoned. Heading to Sylvester, the tracks go between looking used to having bushes and trees between the rails all the way to and beyond Sylvester, where the right-of-way becomes 2 different lines heading north and east respectively. The Albany to Thomasville route heads due south from Albany, directly east of the G&F yard, using a Y that has a scrap yard in the middle. It passes Clark Distribution Center, which has a spur that holds rusted box cars well away from the building, and the spur stops right at the building. Ahead is a facing point lead that connects to Lineage Logistics and Lineage Warehouse number 5, along with an abandoned spur that once served a building that is now Sam's Service Incorporated. The railroad passes through Radium Springs, where there are no industries, Putney, and then passes what once was the Mitchell Power Plant, now nothing but a field of rubble. In Camilla is Golden Peanut, which might be rail-served, Mitchell County Farm Services, which is also a maybe, Nutrient Ag Solutions, which is no longer, an unknown business that receives potash on a new spur, and a small yard near Sexton Farms. Halfway between Camilla and Pelham is POET Biofuels Ethanol Terminal, which is a loop track and 2 different tracks for tank cars. Opened in 2008, this receives unit grain trains and delivered to the G&F in Albany, Georgia. Grain trains come from New Haven, Indiana as NS40D. As needed, are turned over to the G&F in Albany and then come down to the facility. Empties return to Albany, where they are returned over to NS and run back to New Haven as 41D. There does not appear to be a unit ethanol train servicing the facility. North and south of the loop are Ys with connections to the main, and Fairway Road passes the facility. Through Pelham, the railroad runs between West Railroad Street and East Railroad Street. There is a gas station right next to the tracks across the East Railroad Street from the Green Street grade crossing, so you can get gas without missing a train. Going south of Pelham, East Railroad Street is still there, paralleling the railroad, changing to Dixie Highway outside the community. The next town is Meigs, where Dixie Highway becomes East Railroad Street again, joined by Route 3. Route 3 splits off and crosses the G&F Albany-Thomasville line and runs along the west side. East Railroad Street becomes dirt, and while it continues a ways, Route 3 is the better road. South of Meigs is Krug's, a facing point switch that receives aggregates. A little ways down the tracks is Four Corners Gin, which is rail-served by a single spur followed by an abandoned building that looks like it used to be a feed mill. Route 3 turns away from the railroad, but still is paralleling it when the railroad reaches its next industry. Route 3 is 500 feet to the west with Oil Dry Corporation of Georgia between them. This is a large industry that unloads covered hoppers and loads boxcars as well as tractor-trailers. There are about 10 tracks in the facility. And I took a screenshot of this industry and I put it in, I believe it was Roy Smith's group. After that, Route 3 and the GFRR are backed right next to each other, heading to Ochlockonee, Georgia. However, they split again and don't come together again after Ochlockonee. The next community in the GFRR Albany to Thomasville line is Thomasville, Georgia. Here the railroad crosses several grade crossings, including one at West Merrill Street and North Stevens Street, where they are going through an intersection. The GFRR ends with a Y that connects to the CSX. Just west of the Y is the CSX yard in Thomasville, where the two railroads interchange. Back in Albany, we now follow the Albany to Sparks line of the GFRR. This section was built by the Georgia Northern Railway in 1905. This became Southern property in 1966 when the Georgia Northern was merged into their Albany Northern subsidiary. We will start at US 19 where the Albany to Sylvester line split off. The main passes an 8-track yard and then Procter & Gamble Paper Products, which is served by a spur with 2 tracks inside the plant. The next industry is a single spur serving Woodford plywood. The railroad then passes through orchards and forests, heading southeast and south, winding through the countryside. The next community is Bridgeboro, where there is a large collection of rusting silos that once were rail-served, but the spurs are overgrown. It is then back to countryside, the rails winding their way through fields and forests. Some of the fields look like they might be peanut fields. In Doe Run, the GFRR appears to serve Nutrient Ag Solutions with a siding. From here, the rails parallel Route 133. The next industry is southeast of Doe Run. This is Colquitt Agriculture Services. Both industries receive covered hoppers. Next is a little community northwest of Moultrie, Georgia. Here the line splits, one going north of Moultrie and the other going into Moultrie. Both lines used to go through, but now the line in Moultrie is cut in two with tracks coming into Moultrie, with what was two tracks coming in from both sides. Heading into Moultrie, there are a couple abandoned spurs. One goes to Nutrient Ag Solutions GA division. They also serve Beatles Lumber Company, an unknown industry that receives covered hoppers, and there is a siding right at the end of the line. This is roughly the end of the section built by the Georgia Northern. From Moultrie on to the east was built by the Sparks Western Railway, which in 1910 was acquired by the original Georgia and Florida Railroad. This line was completed in 1911 under G&F ownership and became part of the Southern in 1963. NS in 1990, Southern 1963, NS in 1990, and then leased to Gulf in Ohio in 1995 to form the new G&F. The Moultrie Bypass runs north of the city and around to the east, joining back with the original main, which, while listed as active online, is clearly abandoned on Google Maps. The tracks where you can see them have bushes between the rails, and the Mount Olive Church Road grade crossing was recently removed in the images. On this section, the railroad used to serve BCT Gin Company warehouses, Universal Forest Products, and possibly Triangle Furniture. There was also a Y in that area behind the Moultrie Technical College. Some rails remain in place, but they can't be reached from either direction due to rails being so overgrown they would be unsafe or removed altogether. The next community is Ellington, which has Sutton Systems Sales, which receives tank cars and covered hoppers, likely animal feed. The railroad then passes the man-made lake in Reed Bingham State Park and crosses Buck Creek on a very long through-truss bridge. After Moultrie, the line is pretty much running east all the way to Sparks, which is the next community. In Sparks, the railroad runs along Main Street, joining NS and heading south with them. Adel is just a mile down the NS line, and the GFRR has trackage rights to reach their Adel-Foley line and the second NS interchange there. The GFRR Adel to Foley line starts in the NS Main in Adel, Georgia, and has a Y along with a couple sidings to interchange with NS. From Adel, the line basically runs south. Leaving Adel, there is an abandoned spur that looks like it served a now closed paper mill, judging by the look of the industry. The GFRR then runs through countryside to reach Barney, where there is a couple grade crossings, and then the railroad passes through Morven, which is just in more grade crossings. South of Morven, it's miles of countryside, mainly forest and some creeks. In Quitman, which the railroad mainly bypasses, there is a spur going to Coastal Plains Farmers Co-op, which is the first industry that might be rail served, and the GFRR crosses the CSX here. There is a connector, but Quitman is not listed as an interchange. The GFRR crosses the CSX on a wooden bridge that is visible from the grade crossing at South Highland Road. After Quitman is more rural landscape in the little hamlet of Empress, which has an intersection and one house near the grade crossing, and that's it. About a mile south is the state line in the middle of a forest, and the railroad continues to pass through the forests and some minuscule communities. Around Reams, Florida, they used to serve Florida Plywood and still serve an aggregates business. The next large community is Greenville, Florida, where they cross the FGAR at the Greenville Diamond Railroad crossing. This part of the Albany to Foley line originally only ran between Adel and Quitman from 1896 until 1901, when the line was extended to Greenville, where the line's owner, South Georgia Railroad, interchanged with the South Georgia and West Coast Railway. The SG and WC ran from Greenville, Florida, to Perry, Florida, and was merged with South Georgia later in the 20th century. This came under Southern ownership in 1971 and merged with one of their subsidiaries to form a new Southern subsidiary, the Live Oak, Perry, and South Georgia, which it remained until December 15, 1995, when Gulf and Ohio purchased the line and placed the 80-mile line under the new Georgia and Florida name. Continuing from Greenville, the railroad continues through rural forests, roughly paralleling US 221. The next community of any size is Shady Grove, Florida, which is a small hamlet with no industries. There are no industries until Perry, Florida, where a long spur serves the West Fraser paper mill, which might not be rail-served anymore. The same industrial spur has an old spur that once went to super puffed Snacks USA, which looks to have new ballast like they're rebuilding it when the satellite went overhead. Southeast of Pacific's Foley plant, southeast of Perry, the tracks run due south with one of the railroad's largest industries about a mile ahead, Georgia Pacific's Foley plant, which has a pulpwood yard. Multiple tracks were storing cars off spot in a six-track yard, I believe, with locomotive track. It appears that GFRR keeps two EMD GP Series road switchers here to serve the mill as a dedicated switch crew. There is a 4-track yard west of the paper mill. Now the information I found online lists Foley as an interchange with Norfolk Southern. However, in tracing the line, I find no such interchange. Of course, they also listed Valdosta, Georgia as an interchange with CSX and NS, despite the fact that the line there is now a different railroad. In closing, the Georgia, Florida is a good railroad to base a short line model off of, if you want a few industries and lots of running space. There are often miles and several communities between industries. That power is EMD 4-axle road switchers, with the exception of lone SW1500 acquired from the NS. The GP units are two GP40-2s from HATX, originally Boston and Maine, two GP9s from NS, originally Norfolk and Western, two GP38s from NS that were built for Southern, a third GP38 acquired from HLCX built for Penn Central, a pair of GP20s built for Milwaukee Road, a former ICG GP8 rebuilt from Reading GP7, 3 GP10s rebuilt from IC GP9s, and a pair rebuilt from DT&I GP9s, another pair rebuilt from UP GP9Bs, and a quartet of CN GP40-2 LWs that were bought off the HLCX. Some of these units are painted in a green with tangerine stripe scheme, but others wear a mix of colors. And that concludes that episode. If I have enough space on my phone, I will record the next one.